My name's Ben Oliver. I write primarily young adult sci-fi thriller type books. The two books I have out just now are The Loop and The Block. This is The Loop. I don't have a block around. Probably do, but not within reaching distance. Yeah, they're the two I've written so far, and in these books we follow the main character Luca Kane, who is in a sort of death row prison for well, teenagers, really young people in the future. And that sounds very dark and sinister, but that was the idea that came to me and sort of gripped me. So yeah, in this prison, they have the date they're going to be executed, but they can push that date back 6 months if they take part in medical and scientific experiments. And these experiments lead to them gaining a sort of almost like a superpower where they can heal from injuries. And this comes sort of just in time for the apocalypse to happen in the outside world. So they're abandoned in this death row prison with some healing abilities, and they have to get out and figure out what's going on. So yeah, it was a fun story to write. And the third one comes out April next year. So still about 5 months.
Yeah, far too long for Diane, who is very excited. She read The Loop, immediately picked up The Block, and now she's kicking herself when she realised that the third one doesn't come out until April, because apparently you've left her on such an emotional stress point. She doesn't know if she can wait that long, which I think is the sign of a really good book. If you've got people kind of that emotionally frustrated that they can't wait for the next one, I think that's
that's the goal, really, isn't it?
Yeah, if you've got people staying up at night trying to figure out what's going to happen next, I think that's like the winning. That's incredible. Her first question of the evening was all dystopians tend to comment on something that's kind of happening in the world right now, even from like an abstract viewpoint. What was it that kind of inspired you to write the Loop trilogy?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think I didn't have any sort of social commentary in mind when I started writing it. I just had the idea of this death row prison with like young people in it, and I thought that was such a crazy idea and such a horrifying idea that it was. I just started writing it. Like, I think the themes started coming out as I was writing it, and it's sort of a recurring theme in almost everything I write is the imbalance of power. It tends to be rich people in power manipulating, poor people who have no power. And I keep coming back to that theme. Even the thing I'm working on right now, which is very different from The Loop, I can't help but come back to this this theme of the people at the top of the ladder sort of like sawing the rungs off so we can't get up there with them. Like they want to hold on to power no matter what. And that theme keeps coming back around. And The Loop's very much about that at its heart, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely. I can see why it would be something that you'd keep coming back to, because it's so ingrained in kind of everything. Like everything kind of evolves and runs from this kind of like power play that happens in the world. And it's a really interesting concept to kind of play with, I think anyway. It makes some really interesting things.
A lot of writers seem to have themes they come back to. They just can't help but come back to the same, because I don't know. I guess I started writing The Loop at sort of the height of Donald Trump in America and Boris Johnson in the UK, and just these ridiculous clowns in charge, and like that's how I saw it anyway. And I just couldn't understand. And I think a lot of it writing is sort of trying to figure things out for yourself as well, whether you realize it or not. When you're writing, you're working things out for yourself and trying to see things from other people's point of view. And yeah, so I think a lot of my writing process is that, as well as almost like therapy, I suppose.
Yeah, I can totally get that. I think that things that happen in the world, that they're always going to influence kind of like, if you're a creative person, what kind of, whether that be art or writing or anything, it's going to influence what kind of comes out, because it's what you're kind of confronting and dealing with in your subconscious, whether or not you realize that at the time. So I think that's really interesting. The next question I think is a quite good one. So for the loop and the block, their characters seem to be quite trapped. Obviously, they're in kind of like a death row prison, so you're trapped when you're there. Yet there's still time for a lot of kind of like action that's kind of occurring in the books. How did you manage to kind of strike that balance? Was it easy or more complicated to kind of figure out how that would work in a setting that's quite not claustrophobic but pent up?
I think that just kind of came through like redrafting. I think like the first draft of the book was quite different. I've always had this issue when I'm writing that I want to jump straight into the action. I want to get to like the part that's more, I guess, more fun to write for me anyway. I want the chase scenes and the fight scenes and the explosions. I want to get to that because it's fun to write. And I almost write like it's almost like a movie in my head, and I'm just transcribing it quite a lot of the time. And it's something I kind of fought with, and to this day still fight with in my writing. Pacing is something that I'm not instinctively good at. I have to go back and redraft and rework. I'm also not the kind of person who sits down and plots out my whole novel before I start writing it. I tend to get one idea, and it mulls in my head for a little while, and then like at some point it just clicks, and I'm ready to start writing, and I'll write it. And then it evolves as I'm writing. I always say like I'm maybe like 2 or 3 pages ahead of myself when I'm writing, and then something will happen. I'll be that means I have to go all the way back to the start and start seeding these ideas. And this character is actually a little bit different, and I can't introduce her yet, so she's coming a bit later. So the process takes maybe twice as long as it would if I just plotted it out in the first place. But I'm too impatient, and so like I think that mix, that balance between pacing and action and revelations and character development comes from redrafting and reworking it, because I'm terrible at pacing. So it's a lot of restraint and slowing down and getting to know the characters before I jump into the action.
I do think that's really interesting though, because I think in the kind of like creative fields, you do have kind of like 2 kinds of people. The kind of people that can sit and plot and kind of do it that way, and then I think you're in the same camp as me, as like you have the idea, you like get the idea out, and then you fine tune it. Like once it's out in the world, that's the time to kind of like move things around so they work a little bit better. So I do think it's very interesting that kind of different people have different ways at coming at the same process almost.
Yeah, impatient is what I call it. I'm just impatient. I think I want to get into it and write it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be the same. It would be like, let me get it out, and then I'll worry about the rest of it afterwards.
Yeah, I can restructure it and make it work later on, but just get the words on the page just now. Yeah. I'm jealous of people who can sit and plot. I've tried so many times that right, this time I'm going to sit and plot this thing out, start to finish, really think about story structure and character arcs. So that I just can't do it. I need to sit down and write it, and if it's a mess, it's a mess. I'll figure it out later in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th draft. Yeah. I can't plot.
I wouldn't be able to, so I don't think you're alone in that. Diane is also a teacher, and she was wondering how you managed to kind of balance writing with teaching, and how you find kind of writing and still being able to kind of like have another job and kind of balancing kind of life and writing.
It's very difficult. I think I started writing The Loop before I was a teacher. Yeah, I had enough time, and I was working as a support worker for like young people with learning difficulties and additional support needs, and I would just finish my shift, and then no matter what, I'd write for a few hours. And that was something I could do when I did that job. But teaching is very different. It's there's just so much extra that comes with it, the marking and like the planning, and it's mentally very draining. It's very difficult to find time to sit down and write for a long period of time, which is something that I like to do. That I like to have at least a few hours to sit and get into it, but it's just not something I can do right now when I'm still a teacher. So I've had to kind of teach myself to write in small bursts, as well as at the weekend I can give myself a few hours, or holidays I can have like loads of time to write. But while it's, term time, you just have to learn to write small bits, or even just write notes in your phone for like, and let ideas kind of grow in your mind rather than writing them down, which can be a good thing. It just gives your characters more time to grow and develop, but it's difficult. And I mean, I don't have kids or anything, so I can imagine that would be another thing that would be incredibly difficult. I think at this stage of my life, I've just got some time I find time where I can to write, and it works somehow. So,
do you find that being a teacher kind of influences or inspires your work at all, or do you think that they're two very separate kind of things that you do?
No, I find they're very separate things. Like, I don't have any characters that are particularly influenced by, kids I teach or anything like that, or situations I've encountered in my work, or in my work as a teacher that I've incorporated into writing. People have asked me, you teach high school age kids, and you wrote a book about high school age kids in a death row prison. Is that related? And it's not. I started writing the book before I was a teacher, so I don't have this inner want to send these kids to a prison. No, that was just coincidence. No, they are very separate. The two don't really influence each other at all, for me anyway.
That's really interesting, because I think sometimes you kind of expect situations that people are in to kind of come through in their work. So the fact that like you can be in that environment and then have this separate thing going on that's kind of not influenced by that's really interesting. The next question is a fun one, I hope, and that was, why did you think it was important for Luca to be surrounded by books? It seems like a really pivotal thing, especially in The Loop, and it reappears in the second one. Was that like a conscious kind of plot point or idea that you had that was always going to be there?
It wasn't conscious at first. I think, almost every character you write is an extension of yourself. And Luca, at the age he is in those books, when I was his age, like books were like huge, like it was that time in my life where I could read a book a day almost and just get really lost in them and really, really excited and couldn't wait for the next book to come out, or next book in a series that I was reading to come out. And I was constantly in the library at high school and stuff like that. And so it's just that part of me when I was his age, and I think it worked well for him because he's a character who's stuck in prison for 23 hours a day. He's allowed out for 1 hour of exercise. So he needs a way of, escaping without escaping his physical confines, if you know what I mean. He needs, and that's what books were for me when I was his age, like a way to escape certain situations and things. You could get lost in an entirely different world. And that character needed that more than anyone else. He needed to be able to escape to stay sane. And that kind of theme of escaping a situation to maintain your sanity, that reappears in the block and the third book, the Ark, when it comes out, it's in there as well. So that's another kind of ongoing theme. And yeah, I think, and books are cool. I like books, so Luca likes books.
Books are very cool. I was definitely the same when I was that kind of age. It was, and I think I have a very kind of soft spot for anything kind of like fantasy or sci-fi, and I think it was that kind of the way it kind of transports you to like a completely different place. I mean, not all of them are nice places, but it's that being able to kind of visit somewhere without kind of leaving your room or your house. So I think that's I always like it when those kind of themes pop up in books. I think it's really interesting and relatable as well.
That's why Luca does it. I think he calls it, in either the second or the third book, he calls it something like escapology of the psyche or something, which I thought was a cool term. It's like just a way of escaping without escaping, without leaving. So yeah, I like that idea.
The last question that Diana came up with was, how did you research or come up with ideas for tech for a kind of dystopian, futuristic world and setting while still being able to make it sound like plausible or possible scientifically?
Yeah, there was definitely some research, especially into like medical technology and where that's going. So things like people with mechanical hearts and mechanical lungs, um, like the rich people in society can like buy mechanical hearts and lungs, which means they'll never have like the heart attacks and lung disease or whatever. So they're this sort of almost super race, which is another power struggle thing that's part of the themes of the book. And these things sort of, they don't exist, but they are, or there are prototypes of them, and they are trying to develop them. So there was some research that went into those aspects of the medical technology side of it. But I think some of the, like a lot of the fun of writing, especially sci-fi and futuristic sci-fi, is that you can just come up with whatever you want and make it plausible in the writing. So I did a lot of that as well, like certain weapons they have, and like deleters they're called, where it's a sort of like a giant tennis racket that if you go through, or not tennis, it's like I think a scythe I describe it as, and if they go through, like disintegrated into atoms basically, and that's just like fun things I come up with, and I enjoy kind of being able to have fun, probably not the word, but it is fun to just, you need a plot point in your book, it's set in the future, okay, I'll just invent something that doesn't exist yet. So that's quite fun. It's a nice like get out of jail free card for writing. Like you just come up with something that doesn't exist. Okay, that exists in this world now.
I can imagine that's really fun though, to just kind of let your imagination go wild and see what you can kind of like come up with, kind of like technology wise, because I think that reminds me of being a kid a lot. Not that I was thinking about sci-fi weapons that could delete people as a child. That's not what I'm saying at all. But like just imagining things that would like be around in the future and how cool they would be, I think is a really kind of interesting thing that I used to do. I still do sometimes now, to be honest. So that's really interesting. We do now have some of the kind of physical bookshop book club questions. And the first one was, have you always wanted to be an author?
I didn't realize I wanted to be an author until I was probably like 15. I thought I wanted to be in a band for a little while. I thought I wanted to be a rock star of some kind. And I kind of realized that what I really liked were lyrics to songs. I would study lyrics to songs. So it was the writing that I liked more than anything. Then I thought I wanted to be an actor. So I went to like drama school for 2 years. And then I realized it was actually the scripts that I like. And I wasn't doing any acting. I was writing the scripts for like the end of term plays and stuff like that. So it wasn't until, I was about 15 that I think like I knew I wanted to be a writer of some kind, whether that was like a script writer or, plays, theatre plays. I didn't know. But I was reading novels throughout my whole life, but it just seemed too intimidating to write, a book. It was crazy to me to sit down and write 18, 90, 100,000 words. That couldn't be done. And I don't know, I just started writing short stories that got longer and longer. I started entering those short stories into like competitions and submitting them to magazines, and then a few got published. And I think somehow I ended up writing a novel. It wasn't very good, but I wrote it. And I was at university at that point when I wrote my first novel, and I printed it off at the library. I just remember holding like all those pages, thinking that's like book length. And so that kind of broke the spell that it was impossible. And then I just wrote more and more, and got lots of rejections from agents. And I think it was my fifth book. The Loop was my fifth book, and that's the one that got me an agent. So I just learned a little bit from each one. But I didn't know I wanted to be a writer until I was a bit. Well, I did, I think, but I didn't know what type of writer, whether it was a songwriter or a script. It slowly kind of dawned on me that I wanted to be an author.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting when you kind of, as you're growing up, you develop ideas and you refine what it is. Obviously, I was always interested in art, and I was like, I want to be an artist. And then it got kind of, but what kind of artist? and then it was like I really like textiles and fabric, but that's completely different. But then you realize as you kind of grow that it all interlinks together, and you get to the kind of like place that you're supposed to be, I think, which is really interesting. And I think you don't always have to know exactly what you want to do.
I think if you're lucky, you'll figure it out, and then you can work on it.
Yeah.
I think I felt like I figured it out when I was only like about 15. That gave me plenty of time. It took me about 14 or 15 years to get an agent, so it gave me plenty of time to work on what I was doing and get better at it. So yeah, I was lucky to figure it out when I did.
Yeah, it's because it's something that I always say in the online, on the in-store book club, because the in-store one is more kind of the kind of intended ages for YA. And I always say you don't always have to know what you want to do, because there's something now that you're doing that's going to feed into something. Because I think it wasn't until I actually went to university that what I kind of do became like a solid thing. And it's just following kind of your interests and just keeping working at them, and something will appear that you didn't even know was a thing, perhaps.
Yeah, that's certainly the way it worked for me.
The next question is, I always think, a very interesting one, and that is, if you could bring any one character to life from your trilogy, which would it be and why?
I'm tempted to say Apple Moth, but picking a non-human character seems very almost too introvert of me. I shouldn't do that. My favorite character is Pander Banks, but I think Malachi might be more fun to like hang out with and spend time with. He's quite like confident and cocky and funny, so he would definitely sort of overpower me and drown me out. But I'd be quite happy to hang out with him and watch him have fun. I think yeah, Malachi. He's probably the character.
Yeah, it's definitely that. I can imagine that.
He's an extrovert and I'm an introvert, so it'd be like an odd couple thing, but I'd enjoy it.
So the next question was, what's your favorite thing about writing? Do you have a particular part of writing, whether it's kind of like the drafting or creating characters or worlds, that you find you enjoy most?
I definitely enjoy dialogue more than anything. I don't know, like I said, like often when I'm writing, it's just like transcribing a film that's happening in my head, which is a really cool thing. I find to be a really cool thing, and sometimes you can just get lost in that. But dialogue for me comes quite naturally. I hope it comes across as natural, because it feels very natural in my head. And it's almost, it's like listening to a conversation between people, and you can sort of get lost in that, and hearing your characters' voices and their little, idiosyncrasies and things is really interesting. They're very, very like vivid in my mind, these characters. So listening to them talk it's very strange, but it's a really cool experience, and I like transcribing what they're saying in my head, which makes me sound a little bit crazy, but that's okay.
Oh. So do you find that if you could only you could only have one part of writing, would it be kind of like more character focused than the world elements? Would you focus entirely on characters, or would you create a world for them to be in that was kind of devoid of characters, if that makes sense? If you could only have one or the other.
Because I really enjoy, like, when you get the spark of an idea, it's never the character. Characters for me is not the first point into a book or into a story. It's always the idea, the situation, like a death row prison for young people. That was the spark. So I don't think I would have these ideas with just characters. The worlds wouldn't exist. So that's a difficult question. No, I think if I could only choose one, my favorite part of writing is probably dialogue and characters. But if I could only choose one, it would probably be worlds and world building, because that's the initial spark, and that's an amazing moment when something just kind of clicks, and you're like, oh, that's a great idea, or that's a great setting, or that's a great scenario or a situation to put characters into. So strangely, my favorite part of writing is probably characters and dialogue, but if I could only choose one, it would be world building, I think. So, yeah.
You always find that it's the kind of world that comes to you first, and then the kind of characters come in afterwards. Is that the same with all your books, or do you think that sometimes you have different sparks of creation? Because I know some people, they always get the kind of world come to them first and then the characters follow, but then other people sometimes have like a particular character that just kind of shouts at them until they create something for them. And I always think that's really interesting. I know some people are a bit of both as well.
Well, I think probably 90% of the time it is either a scenario or a world or a setting. It's almost never a character that comes first. Even like something I'm writing just now, it's a scenario first, definitely. Yeah, I'm trying to think because the character came very early in the idea, almost a second after I had the idea, but the idea came first, definitely. Yeah, it's never character first for me. It's almost world or situation or scenario.
I just find it a really interesting thing to know, like, myself. That's just a bit of nosiness on my behalf. I find it really interesting to know where kind of like the sparks for something comes from, and how kind of different people can have completely different sparks, and some have similar sparks every time. So it might always be a character that comes to them first, or a world or a setting or something. I just find it a very interesting question, that one.
Yeah, no, I find that interesting too. I love talking to other like writers and creative people about like their process and where ideas, well, not where ideas come from, because writers in general don't really like the idea, but like just the way it comes to you and in which order, and like, is it character, is it scenario, is it setting, is it even genre? Some people might just like, I want to write this genre and then work on an idea. I've never done that, but I know people who have, which is interesting. Yeah, I find that really interesting as well.
Yeah, I find it, I just find it a very interesting kind of thing to talk about. I think it's the artist in me that likes to know where other people get their kind of like initial sparks from as well. Because I think a lot of my sparks come from kind of the world around me and colours. So I always find it very interesting to know whether other people have similar kind of like are very consistent with their sparks, or if they're a bit more crazy like mine are, because mine do seem to come out of nowhere in any direction. There never seems to be rhyme or reason for mine.
Yeah, it's the same. Like a book idea will just come out of nowhere sometimes. Sometimes you'll have half an idea and then something else will kind of join it and it'll become a full idea. Sometimes a full idea just appears out of almost nowhere. Yeah, it's almost inexplicable. It's really cool. It's very interesting.
Yeah. So another question, and is one that I'm really interested to hear the answer of as well, is how is it writing a trilogy or a series that kind of, how do you manage to kind of break down what I imagine is a big story in your head into kind of like readable chunks, almost is the best way I can describe of it. Do you start off with this massive kind of like storyline that is the whole kind of series and then break it down from there, or does it come to you in sections and then that's kind of how you write it? I always find it very interesting, especially as someone who likes sci-fi and fantasy, how the different elements get to become either a series or a trilogy, and how it gets broken down into those segments, and what it's like writing kind of a joint world through different books.
It's a good question. I'd never written even a sequel before. In my unpublished books that I've been working on before, it'd always been just one book after like one idea, then the next idea, and the next idea. The Loop, as soon as I had the idea and I started writing it, I knew it was bigger than one story. But as I said, I'm not a plotter. I don't sit down and write the whole thing out. So I didn't actually know. But when I was talking to my agent about it, we both kind of agreed it could be more than, well, it's more than one book, probably 3 books. So when we took it to the publishers, we sold it as a trilogy. And then my publisher was like, brilliant. Can we have a breakdown of the books 2 and 3 so we know how to sell it and and to foreign markets and things like that? And I was like, I don't know what happens in books 2 or 3. So I just had to write a couple of pages. Yeah. So I wrote a couple of pages of like made up stuff that is not at all what book 2 and 3 turned out to be, but that's fine. So yeah, I didn't really know what to expect. I knew there was these natural sort of rising action that kept happening that came to a crescendo, and I was like, okay, that's where book 1 ends. That's a naturally good ending point. And then book 2, same thing. Like I said, when I'm writing it, I'm usually 2 or 3 pages ahead of myself in my mind. But the ending came to me maybe 3/4 of the way through the writing process. And I was like, oh, good, that's where that one ends. That is the ending of book 2. That's perfect. And then, yeah, book 3, that was like right in the middle of the pandemic, writing book 3. So, yeah, that was a long, difficult process. Yeah, I just found that very slow going. And it took me a long time to figure out exactly where I wanted to go. The first draft that I sent into my publisher, they were like, yeah, it's good, but it needs, like, it just doesn't feel right. And I was like, I know. I was kind of hoping you would fix that for me, but that's not their job. So it came back to me. And then when I kind of figured out, yeah, that's the ending. That makes perfect sense. That brings the story full circle, which suits the name of the Loop. It just has this, it continues ends the themes thematically, makes sense. And I think knowing the ending before you get there is important, because you can really make the themes work, and you can set things up that come to a natural conclusion. So my issue was I didn't know where book 3 was going to end. So writing a trilogy, it is a very strange thing to do. It was my first time doing it, so I kind of figured it out as I went along, and I figured out that knowing the endings of each book is important. So my non-plotting process didn't work very well until I had the ending. And so it took a lot, as usual with me, it took a lot of writing and rewriting and redrafting and figuring things out. So it was a long process, but it was good. And yeah, it was also, finishing book 3 was a very kind of like sad moment, knowing that I've finished these books now. I won't write these characters again. So yeah, that was strange. But yeah, it was good though. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot from that as well.
Yeah, I can imagine, like, with anything I can imagine with a standalone as well, that writing and then getting to that kind of last page almost, as you do with a reader, is quite like an emotional experience and quite strange to let go of certain characters and worlds. But I imagine if it's something that is a trilogy or a series, kind of getting to that end point when you've spent so long kind of in a world and with certain characters is very strange, and a little bit of, I'd find it very emotional as a person to kind of be like, oh, it's done.
Yeah, it sort of crept up on me as well. All of a sudden, I just finished writing it, and I was like, "Oh, well, yeah, that's it. It's over. I've done it." It was strange that it sort of was all of a sudden over. Yeah. I almost wanted to write another draft, seventh draft or whatever.
Where can I go with this now? There's got to be another thing I can do in this world. I think if I was a writer, that would be something I'd get stuck in. Like, I think if I created a world, which I am not talented enough to do, because when it comes to world building, I love reading books for world building, like, and all the little tiny nuggets of information that are in it. But there's no way I could amass that much kind of knowledge about a single place to do it. So I would I'd be an emotional wreck after letting go of a world. I think I'd constantly want to go back to that one place. Be like, oh, well, this is a different set of characters, but they're in the same world.
Very tempting. You just kind of have to. But for me, I have to try and make the next thing I write just as compelling or even more compelling. But then that surely just leads to a path of destruction where I just keep writing worlds I never want to leave. But I don't know. Writing's fun, so it's fine.
So is there anything you can tell us about the third book without giving too much away? Obviously, we know it's April, I believe.
Yeah, April.
Yep.
Was there anything? It's very difficult because people who haven't read the second book won't know how it ends, and it's kind of a major ending, so it's hard to say. I would say that it does continue similar themes of power imbalances. There's lots of action. There's similar settings like tunnels, rat tunnels and things from the first book may make a reappearance. Certain characters may not survive, some will. It's very difficult. I'm trying to think how I can not give it away. Yeah, I guess Happy, the evil artificial intelligence that is trying to destroy the world, is getting closer and closer to achieving its goal, and our loopers have to figure out a way of fighting against the 99% odds that they're going to lose. And yeah, there's more virtual reality. There's more, damaging technology. I'm so struggling trying not to give it away here. There's not much I can say other than it follows on from book 2 and escalates even further.
I know so many people that are just so excited, but also wishing they hadn't read book 2 yet. I think you've done a very good job of getting the endings of book 1 and book 2 to be kind of like a natural stopping point, but still make you want to immediately go out and get your hands on the next book. I think your trilogy is one of those ones that people talk about needing 24-hour bookshops for. So that when you finish it, you can immediately go out and get the second or the third one, despite the fact it might be like 2:00 in the morning. So I think you've done like incredibly well with the kind of like break points, but still making them want to immediately read the next bit, which I imagine is very hard to do.
It can be, yeah. I think, yeah, like I said, there was moments when I struggled with the writing process, and you need to know, certainly for me, I kind of figured out I need to know the ending so I can make it work properly. So yeah, it did take a lot of figuring out, but it was, yeah, definitely worth it. I loved writing those books, and I do like the way all three of them end. So I'm glad other people do too.